Welcome to the AASA PDK Decennial Survey podcast series, where we take a look at a variety of issues affecting school system leadership nationwide. During the second episode of this mini-series, CEO of PDK International, Josh Starr, will be speaking with Drs. Kelley, Deb Kerr, and Almi, Abeyta on a conversation about women in leadership.
I want to welcome you all to our podcast series, which is a joint partnership between AASA and PDK. I am Josh Starr. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of PDK International, a former superintendent of schools. And we worked this year with AASA on the Great Decennial Survey, which has just been released. And we're doing a podcast series with superintendents and some former superintendents to kind of tease out the issues that we're facing in public education system leadership these days. So today, we are really excited to talk with three great women leaders in the superintendency who have distinguished themselves in their careers, and I think will really be able to provide some insight into what it means to be a woman leading in the top position. So I'm going to let everybody introduce themselves. We have Deb Kerr, we have Almi Abeyta, and we have Kelley. So let's start with Deb, and then we'll do Almi, and then Carol. So Deb.
Thank you, Josh, and welcome to my panelists today. It's exciting to see everyone and be together. I think this is an important topic to promote women in leadership. And my career revolves around having lots of experiences in being promoted as a woman in leadership. And so I was the first woman principal, the first woman superintendent. And it goes kind of on, but it's the last of the first. So I just want you to know that. But I'm parochial educated. I've worked in all sectors of education. I've dedicated the last 34 years of my life to public education. And I've been a superintendent in the state of Wisconsin for the last 20 years. My previous district is Brown Deer School District, which is the most diverse school district in the state of Wisconsin, serving over 80% students of color and 50% economically disadvantaged. I've enjoyed working with my colleagues at every level, from the state level and especially at the AASA, because I believe that it's important that we continue to network and share our journeys and work together. So I'm very honored to be here today. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Deb. It's great to have you on here. Almi, tell us a little bit about who you are, where you come from, and what the district you're leading right now.
Sure. My name is Almi Abeyta, and I am currently the superintendent of Chelsea, Massachusetts. My leadership journey, as I started off, is very, very traditional. I still say I am a kindergarten teacher, always will be, and that's a very unusual step for a superintendent. But I started off my journey as a kindergarten teacher, and then went straight from teaching kindergarten to my master's degree program for school leadership, straight into the principalship, without any assistant principalship, anything else in between. I was a very young principal in the Boston Public Schools. I was all of maybe 30 years old and one of the only Latinas in the Boston Public Schools as a principal. And then my leadership journey kind of took me, I say I was an assistant superintendent, deputy superintendent for 10 years. I was like deputy superintendent in waiting. I was assistant superintendent deputy in 3 different districts. I learned a ton. I was use that time, I say mom first. So I was raising my child, and I always said, when I'm ready to really marry a community, I will become a superintendent. So when my daughter ventured off to college, I decided it was time for me to lead and really lead. So that's when I ended up applying to the superintendency in Chelsea, Massachusetts. And I'm just honored and grateful to be here with this wonderful panel. Thank you.
And you just hit on like 3 different themes that we're going to be coming back to, right? So
Okay.
We'll talk about that in a sec. Carol, tell us a little bit about where you are and your journey there.
Absolutely. First, thanks you so much for having me on the panel. I'm super excited to learn from my colleagues today and to participate. So I'm Kelley. I have the pleasure of serving currently as superintendent of Oak Park Elementary School District 97, which is a pre-K through 8 public school system here in Oak Park, Illinois. We have approximately 5,800 students. We lost, give or take, about 3 to 4% this year since the start of the pandemic. And prior to joining District 97, I'm completing my 6th year now as superintendent. I also spent 3 years as superintendent of schools back in New Jersey for Branchburg Township School District. the majority of my career in education has been in New Jersey prior to coming here in Illinois. And unlike my other panelists, I came into education in a really alternate pathway. So my undergraduate degree, honestly, I'm a systems engineer, and that's what I studied undergraduate. And I also have an MBA from University of Virginia. So it was a really interesting alternate path into the field of education. I feel, though, that this is my home. I have a really deep commitment to equity-centered systems, to change and address the racial, the economic, the academic disparities that we often find in education. So once again, I'm really excited to be here today to discuss the study and also to learn from my other panelists.
Well, that's great. So thank you all. And I also want to acknowledge, just so I'm a man and I'm talking to 3 women about leadership, right? So it is pretty much guaranteed that I will ask questions that if you were less polite, you would roll your eyes at and be like, well, yeah, of course we go through that kind of stuff. But I also I think it's also important that people understand, the challenges and the opportunities that exist when you're a woman in leadership. And so I may be asking some of those questions to kind of get them out there. So the first one, though, I just, from my experience, and I think we saw some of this in the data as well, women tend to get into the superintendency after being in the instructional side, right? Like, women are more naturally seen as instructional leaders. Men are more naturally seen as operations leaders, right? And being able to manage that side. First, I first want to understand, A, have you seen that in your own careers? And then B, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And any of you can go. I mean, I can call on you individually, but whoever wants to jump. So have you experienced that women tend to be pigeonholed as instructional leaders, whereas men are seen as being more system leaders and have the whole, and particularly finance? And then you think it's a good thing or a bad thing? So who wants to go first?
I can. That's fine. Well, that's an interesting thought, because as I look at some of my former colleagues that have been superintendents, they have come through traditional roles of football coach, athletic director, and then superintendent. And so that definitely wasn't my trajectory, but I was an athletic director, I was a principal, but I was never a curriculum director. But I just loved learning and I loved kids. And I just think today, any leader, no matter what level you're at, whether you're a superintendent or a principal, you need to be an instructional leader, because our kids and our teachers need that support in a leader. And you need to know how to have the kind of conversations and support them in their role, because education is a tough job. And I think if we've learned anything from this pandemic, our teachers have a greater appreciation, I think, from our parents of all the work that they have done just to get through this virtual learning as best they could, raise their own families. But they teach more than just content. They teach kids how to be great people, respect, responsible citizens, and how to make a contribution and have a voice in their learning. So I think we can do better, but it's not traditional as it used to be.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with you. Personally, it is the reason why I wanted to get into educational leadership. From an instructional standpoint, I did serve as, on the curriculum side. And honestly, it could be based on that interest. When I think of my male colleagues that are sitting in this seat, they have similar backgrounds as well, either curriculum or maybe instructional technology. However, I will say that even though that definitely should be the strength, there are many other strengths too that are really necessary, part of our skill set or our toolbox that we have to have as superintendents. The ability to connect with and inspire other people, the ability to communicate your vision, the business savviness, the operational leadership, the equity lens, the public, advocacy. I think the list goes on and on and on, but I could not agree more with Deb that, that instructional leadership lens really has to be the forefront because of the work that we do on behalf of the students that we have the privilege of serving.
And I agree with both. I think that I believe in the early 2000s, even when I was studying to be a principal, there was this whole shift of principals have to be instructional leaders, and it was like this new thing. And I was like, well, that's great, because that's me. And it slowly, I think, shifted to the superintendency as well. We are the lead learners of our school system. And I mean, just today I was sitting in a progress monitoring meeting, although over Zoom, and the teachers were saying, oh, it's so nice to be talking about instruction, because lately during the pandemic, what we've been focused on, at least for me, is a lot of operational things. And then I go home and like, why am I so exhausted? And why is it so foreign to me? Because I'm talking about COVID-19 poll testing, I'm talking about vaccinations and all the operational stuff that I did not go into education to do. And that's not my thing. And I'm like, oh, when I get to actually talk about instruction, I'm like, oh yeah, this is great. This is why I do what I do. And this is what I'm most familiar with. And it's like putting on an old shoe. And I'm like, oh, but we've just been so busy with ops lately and crisis management that it's today, even just today, being like able to re-engage the instructional side of who I am as a leader was so important. And so I do think that there's been this whole shift to make sure from superintendents to principals that we are leading instruction and we know instruction. And I do agree that that's been the shift over the last, probably since the early 2000s, I'd say.
I told one of my mentors, you know about PDK International, I said, you didn't teach us about health insurance and transportation
Right.
in school. And those are the two things that were killing me. But I guess, and I don't want to make assumptions, but is there a credibility issue when it comes to the operations side, right? I feel like, and again, I may be reading into this, so tell me if I'm wrong, but that oftentimes men are seen by school boards and are seen by the community as having some credibility in the operations side that women sometimes struggle with because of the assumption that they're more on the instructional side. Have you encountered that at all, or is that just, I'm just making that up?
I personally have not encountered it. I prior to coming into education, came from, the business sector. I have not heard from my female colleagues, and Deb and Almi, maybe you could chime in here, the confidence that we carry at the board table or in the community. I definitely feel that, my female colleagues can go toe to toe with any of our male colleagues. So I've not personally encountered.
Oh, let me be clear. I know they can go toe to toe. It's whether a school board, right,
Yeah,
or community thinks
yeah, I've not encountered that.
All right. And what about Almi or Deb? Have you ever encountered that at all?
I have not. And I also think when you look at my cabinet, when I first got here, we're mostly women.
Mm-hmm.
And then my school committee is mostly women as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a confidence there. And as a principal, you have to deal with operations every day. And that's the best training ground, I think, for the superintendency. And you're dealing with so much. And you scale it up when you become a superintendent. So you've already, if like I say, if you've already been a principal, it's like you've dealt with so much already. Best training ground, I think, for the superintendency. So I actually felt very confident in that area, and I didn't feel like I was lacking.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay.
I think the area where it really shows up is school finance and learning and understanding the relationships between the numbers and the school funding formulas. And so I think any superintendent who has not been involved in school finance deeply, I'm an instructor of school finance at one of our local universities here, Cardinal Stritch. That's a challenge for anyone. Yeah. But the great thing is organizations like our AASA or our state organizations have lots of support programs and networks and cohorts who help lead the way. And so I have to go back to the membership programs that our AASA has to support aspiring principals, aspiring superintendents into these roles so that you know how to tackle some of these things that might not be your strength right now, but will be a strength later as you gain more experience.
Yep, I love the plugs for AASA programming that go in there. It's doing a good job with that, Deb. So let me ask about this, right? So on one hand, you look at the fact that there are more women superintendents than there are women leaders in corporate America, which is a great thing. But that also may just reflect the numbers, right? 80% of teachers are women. So why aren't we seeing more? Like what is keeping more women from getting to the top job, even though it may be greater than other sectors? Is it, what do you think's behind that? Who wants to start with on that one?
I can start.
Yeah,
I think one thing is confidence and being pushed in that area. A lot of women don't put themselves out there, and it's just natural. So a lot of times women who have come into leadership positions or superintendent roles have been promoted, like, you're really good, I'm going to move you to an assistant superintendent, for example. And so they've had someone to kind of push them along the way, or they've been deputy superintendent leaves, and then they get put as superintendent. So I think a lot of it is, as women, I'll speak for myself as a Latina woman. I'm not good at asserting myself. It's something I've had to learn over the years, and to put myself out there. And so I think it's something that you have to be encouraged to do, and say, people around you say, you can do this. Like my mentor, Dr. Bob Peterkin from the Urban Superintendents Program, he always believed that one day I would be a superintendent, even when I was a principal, and came to his program, and I was like, yeah, right, Bob. I'll believe it someday. I'm glad you have more belief in me than I do. And he always lifted me up. So I think for us as women, we just have to lift other people up, other women up, and say, you can do this, and mentor those. We have a responsibility, I think, to mentor people, so that way we can pour in and create more opportunities for women of color, women in general.
Mm-hmm. Carol, Deb, what do you think?
I totally agree. It's so funny that you mentioned Bob's name, because he spoke that life into me as well. So it's interesting. I also wonder if a barrier might be to get into leadership positions, you need to go back to school. You need to get the licensure. So I often wonder, like, might that be a barrier? And then, like, what are the ways that school districts, might create practices or procedures where they're providing, like, the financial incentives? I know that a lot of districts will offer reimbursement if you're doing coursework that leads to something like what you're currently doing, but perhaps they can think of that reimbursement for courses that might lead to some leadership positions. When I began teaching, I already had my MBA in New Jersey. For others, that might be a burden to them. It may be a burden, in terms of, like, their life trajectory and what else is happening in their life personally. So, like, what are the ways maybe that districts or even states can create cohorts, where your learning is taking place, like, right after work, like right on the campus where you work. So I think it's really necessary for us to really examine, like, what might be the barriers that are preventing, like you said, 80% of our workforce are female. So even though we have more women in leadership positions than the S&P, like, honestly, just 25%, really? So there obviously are barriers that we need to examine.
Yeah. Deb, what do you think?
Yeah, and I agree with Carol with the barriers, and Almi too with the confidence, because I was tapped on the shoulder by my mentor, Dr. Dan Burke. And I said, are you talking to me? I'm like, are you, what? You think I should be a superintendent? And I think it's that confidence piece that Almi talks about, that sometimes we don't value our skills enough as a leader to take it to the next level. And the research has shown that women typically don't apply for jobs if they don't have every single qualification, mastered on the job description. And so we've got to stop that. We've got to encourage our fellow women to go for it. To put yourself out there, because every interview is a learning experience, and you might not know all the answers, but you certainly know how to get the answers, or learn something new, or figure out who to go to find out more information. So I just think it's important that we continue to intentionally tap people on the shoulder like we have been tapped on the shoulder as well.
Yeah, Deb, I'm so glad you brought that up. I remember when I was superintendent in Stanford, and I was young, I was 35 when I started, and my deputy, she was much older than I was, and she told me about this. She was like, the thing, I said, well, how come, you haven't been superintendent yet? She actually became superintendent after me. She's like, look, women tend to wait until they check every box. She says, whereas men just jump in. I was sort of like, I just jumped in. But so, and building on that too, let's talk a little bit about the family dynamics. And I think it's probably an obvious question, but I'm wondering what to do about it. So again, when I became superintendent at 35, I had 2 young kids. I had another one a couple of years after that. Well, my wife had them, but you get my point. I was commuting. No one ever questioned what, how I was being superintendent in a school, whether I should be superintendent of schools and spend all, the demands and during the days and the nights and all that, and having young children. And this is an obvious question, but like, I'm assuming if I were a woman, there would have been much greater scrutiny around that. So A, have you experienced that at all? And B, like, what do we do about that? How do we get, I know it happens in the workplace, but like, what should we be doing about that in public school systems so that it's not seen as a barrier, and it's also not looked upon askance if you do, have young kids and want to be a superintendent. So I don't know. Almi, let's start with you, because you brought that up earlier, that it was a consideration. How do we deal with this factor?
Well, even since the time I was a principal, my daughter was a kid. I remember this. My daughter went into kindergarten when I became a principal, was asked to be a principal. And I remember telling my deputy superintendent, I don't think I can be a principal. I have a 5-year-old, and how am I going to be mom and principal at the same time? And I figured it out. I moved to the neighborhood where I was principal, and I had my daughter in my school with me, so she didn't get left behind, and she was always with me. We drove into school together. She was there, and it was beautiful. And that's how I was able to do it. So I don't feel like I missed out on my daughter's childhood. And then as an assistant superintendent, I saw my superintendents giving so much of their time, and I thought I'm just not ready for that kind of like that commitment. And I stayed in the assistant superintendency for a while. And then when my daughter finally took off to college, I was like, okay, it's time for me to fly. Maybe I should apply for a superintendency. But then I was also waiting for the right fit. I wanted to be in urban education. I wanted to be in a predominantly Latino community. And so I was just waiting for the right fit, because I had learned enough in the assistant superintendency that you're also interviewing where you go. I can select where I want to be, and I want to be in a place where I can be successful. But for me, what worked for me was the assistant superintendent role until my daughter took off to college. I was committed to being a mom, and I didn't want to miss an ice skating competition or a dance competition. I think I wrote my dissertation, because I worked full-time while I was working on my dissertation, in the ice skating rink. Literally, I would sit there and type away while my daughter was ice skating. Or I was in the dance, I remember sitting in the dance foyer where all the moms were sitting, and they probably thought I was rude, but I would be working on my dissertation. Right. And that you just learn to, as a woman, I think as a mom, you learn to multitask. And you just learn to do it, whether it's riding in the car or whatever.
So it's some of the best preparation for the superintendency.
You figure it out. Yeah, you tune out the noise and you start writing. My best writing was in the ice skating rink. So I just say that because I think as a mom, you become very you can multitask and you just figure it out.
Yeah. So I don't know, Deb, Carol, have you seen it all? And again, I'm also wondering about what we can do so that to kind of change the narrative around it, so that women don't see it as something that should keep them from aspiring to the top job and learn from it. What do you have to say?
So go ahead.
Go ahead, Carol.
No, you go.
Okay. What I have seen too, there's just a lot of misperceptions about women in their role as a leader. let's face it, women are the caregivers of their families in most of the cases. And, what we've learned through this pandemic is that some of our women parents and had to quit their jobs because they couldn't juggle the childcare, the virtual learning, and taking care of their family all at the same time. So they are the superheroes, but we can't let some of those misperceptions change our mind. So we have to go into any interview process open-minded. I know of colleagues who had to disguise that they were pregnant because they were worried that they would be falsely misunderstood. Because like Almi said, you can do it all. You figure out how to support the network that you need to support your family, whether it's a significant other or your extended family. So I have a high school principal, Tasha Womack. She's got 5 children, and she's done a fabulous job. And there was never at any time did I think that she couldn't do her job, because she did it all, but she had an extended network. And so that's what you have to do. You just have to, make sure you have that extended network and that support, and you can get it done, because we have women leaders who've been doing it for a long time.
That's right. Carol, what do you have to say?
Totally agree with both what Deb said and Almi. I am honored to have 2 amazing young, well, they're not young anymore, young men, my sons, but they were pretty young when I first became at the time it was a school leader, 2 and 4. So they've, kind of have seen me through. And I will definitely say you have to lean on your support network. But, as Almi was saying, you also have to interview that community as well, and just to make sure that it is a fit. I have experienced, though, some interviews where people probably should not have asked those questions. I have experienced, even in the superintendent's role, when I accepted this current position, and we see men doing this all the time, it was in a different state. And my youngest son is an athlete. He plays lacrosse. I did not want him to have to move. So I was going back and forth. And there were a couple of questions, around that. But, my commitment has always been to this community. But my commitment, first and foremost, will always be with my sons. So I made sure that I was at his games. I made sure that, I was, even if it were, distance, that I was involved with, what was happening with his school. So I do believe that it can be done. And if there are any aspiring female soups that are listening and are concerned, please know that you have me as evidence that it can be done. But I don't want to pretend that in every community that everyone is as welcoming as others. So I do feel that it's important for you to also really consider if this is a community that will support my whole self. And I do believe that they're out there.
So when I went from Stanford to Montgomery County, my kids were young, they were in school and all that. I guess it was 5th grade, 4th grade, and not even kindergarten at the time, right? And I said to the board when they interviewed me, and then I made a very public statement about it as well. I said, I will not go out on Wednesday nights. And if you need me on a weekend, I need a month in advance, because that's when we're going to soccer and base, whatever it may be. I'd love to do weekend stuff, but you got to book me a month in advance. Yeah. And I kind of actually made it up on the spot. But it did 2 things. One, people stuck to it. They totally respected it. And a number of young administrators who had families said, thank you. You now gave me space to do that to my school. I'm like, good, put it out there. And I didn't realize, just by saying it, look, this is what I got to do. Any other time you got me, whenever you want, but Wednesday nights are my family night. Weekends, I need a month in advance for scheduling so that I can rearrange carpools. And I didn't have the guts to say that when I was in my first superintendency, but saying in my second one, and I always coach people to do that. So I've been noticing a dynamic that, I'm sure that you all are going to say again, duh, Josh, we've known this for years, but particularly recently, the last year, it seems to me that female superintendents of color in particular are getting publicly beat up more than I've seen in the past. So, and some of these are in the big cities, Boston, Denver, couple others, right? Some of the craziness about Sonia in Baltimore around being super, And is this a real pattern, right? Do female superintendents get beat up more? And I say that, figuratively,
Mhm.
not literally. And is it happening more with women of color sitting in the top spot, right? Or was it just happenstances here? Like, what are you all seeing about that? Is that a real dynamic? And then I'm wondering, is there an extra layer of sort of protection or of armor you have to put on as a woman, in particular as a woman of color, when you're in the superintendency? So talk a little bit about that, and maybe Carol and Almi start with that, and Deb, I'd like to hear your thoughts as well.
That's a really great question. I wonder, the way that COVID has really highlighted, the disparities, whether it's healthcare or, the disparities in terms of who's most impacted. I wonder if this was always the case, but everything is amplified, due to COVID. And all I know is my own experience as a African-American female superintendent now for 9 years. There are things that I have experienced that, my colleagues who don't look like me have not. There are things that I might lead and get certain resistance that some of my colleagues have not. I'll give a good example. I would say my predecessor is a white male, and there have been numerous occasions. One example last year, before COVID. Has it just been a year? Right before COVID, one of our new principals resigned, effective immediately. And the reaction by the community, it became, what did Carol Kelley not do? Where there's public comments and people coming to board meetings and things of that nature. And the individuals on my cabinet team who've been, in the district, longer than I have, that worked with the prior superintendent, were just really shocked and amazed by, just the kind of comparison between, that reaction with me versus with my predecessor. And I can go on and on and on and on and on. I think with COVID, the emotions are just running high. Whatever decisions superintendents make right now, whether you say that we're going to be remote only or we're going to have students back in, whatever the decision is, folk are not going to be happy. But I wonder, I do think that everyone is seeing folk trying to plan a protest at your house or doing a petition to have you fired. But I just feel that it has really been amplified, perhaps for women and perhaps for women of color. I don't have any hard evidence because I live this on a daily basis, but it does seem interesting.
For me, it's very sad because I haven't intentionally hired many women of color in the Brown Deer School District, and I've had to intervene on more occasions than I would like to admit to help disrupt the unethical and unprofessional conduct of parents or community members. And
because you thought that were they coming after the folks who had hired more than they were afterwards? So you were actually seeing that as a pattern in your system.
Yeah, and I think I agree with Carol and Almi that everyone's emotions are very raw right now because of the pandemic for lots of different reasons. People have been isolated, they've not been with their families, and so there's just so much of a part of the interpersonal relationships that we've missed out on for the last year. And I think it's very important as leaders that we have to step up and protect our women leaders when they get chastised for making decisions that are always in the best interest of kids, but some people think otherwise.
Yeah. All right, we're going to wrap up. I have a couple speed round questions that I want to throw at you. So I'm very tempted to ask you what advice you have for women who aspire to the superintendency. So I want you to answer that, but I also want you to give advice to men and school board members, right? Because part of it is if men are in charge, they've got to figure out how to make sure that we get women in charge, right? So on one hand, we got to give advice to women about what they need to do. I want you to do, but I also want you to give advice to men about what they should do to get more women into these seats. So let me start there, and then I'll do the other. So quickly, like what's your advice? Your advice to women who are aspiring, and then your advice to men about how to promote more women. We'll go Almi, Carol, Deb.
Well, I would say to the men, and when I look at my mentors in education, they've all been men, men of color, which is very interesting for me. So men of color have lifted me up, and I am so incredibly grateful for the men who really saw something in me and said, we're gonna lift Almi up and develop her to be a leader. And so I would say continue to do that, lift women up, give them a voice, and encourage them to apply for jobs that maybe they're a little intimidated to apply for, may not have the confidence, because you're just saying you can do this may mean the world to somebody. And I would say to women to be confident in the skill sets that you have, and put yourself out there, because you are confident and you can do this job. And so I would say those two things.
All right, Carol, what do you have to say to men? What do you have to say to women?
So to men, I would say make room, make space, and to create pathways to leadership. Just, make space at the table because there's always room. To the women, like Almi said, I would say to trust and believe in yourself, and to, go after like what's in your heart and be authentic with that. But most importantly, to believe in yourself and to trust that it can be done. You can do this, and you are the person that we need. Our students need you for these roles. So that would be my
authenticity
advice.
is so key for any leader, right? If you can't be yourself, then you can't do the job. Deb, what do you have to say?
Yeah, I'm like Almi. I've also been mentored by several men. Dr. Keith Marty was also very instrumental as I made my journey to Brown Deer School District, and we're still in touch today. But I think it's important to let men that we're here not to compete with you, but we're here to be your professional colleagues. And that's really important. And so take advantage of those opportunities to ask those people that you trust the most, especially women leaders, if you have questions about things that you're not certain about. Because I've just got great relationships with all men and women in leadership roles, and I really value their perspectives and input. And then for the women, I would say surround yourself with people who will help elevate and make you feel positive about your work in education. People who you can trust to ask those really critical questions on, do you think this is a good opportunity for me? Or how should I handle this situation? You've got to have those critical friends in your leadership circle. And I know I have been very blessed to have critical friends that have helped me along the way, because the leadership journey is fraught with a lot of challenges, but also opportunities.
Yeah, some of those peer mentors can be as important as some of the mentors, right? Or I don't know what the other word is. Okay, quick speed round on this. What I want to know two things: either the book you're reading or the show you're binge watching. And I want to know what's the greatest joy you take from the superintendency, because we talk so much about how hard it is and like you can't beat up, but it's also a joyous job in lots of ways. So what show are you binge watching or book you're reading? And in one sentence, like what's the greatest joy you take from being a superintendent? We'll go Deb, Almi, Carol.
Okay. Well, I binge watched The Crown on Netflix because I just love that show, and there are a whole bunch of other stuff. So that was really fun. I'm reading a book called Why We're So Divided by Ezra Klein, because in my role, in my journey to run for state superintendent of public instruction here in Wisconsin, there's just lots of polarization, and I want to try to see if I can be a bridge builder and bring people together. The joy I get being a woman leader is helping through my AASA work to network with other women and build them up, whether it's through the cohorts, these kind of presentations, and then run for president, because we've only had 7 women presidents in AASA. And so we can do better than that. And Christy Wilson and I are the first back-to-back female presidents of AASA. So go for it. Shoot for the moon.
All right, Almi, what do you got?
Wow. Oh, gosh. I'm embarrassed to say what I binge watch.
Don't
we all do it. Don't worry.
It's fine.
I watch, lately it was Anne of Green Gables, okay? And my family sleeps.
Pretty
They
good.
all leave the room when I'm watching Anne of Green Gables or Hallmark Channel. They're like gone.
Right.
And I like it because I just don't have to think and I just enjoy
Yep.
it. The book I'm reading is Lioness Rising. And I love any books by Jackie Bevere. And it's just, I really need to fight. I love spiritual books, books that draw me close, that help me find, like, just ground me and who I am as a person and as a leader.
Awesome. And the joy you take from being a superintendent.
Oh, the joy is being able to honestly pour into my leadership team. I love being able to create. And I just think that being a leader for me is the creative side of it, like creating programs, creating partnerships, and just really seeing how that impacts the ground. So that's the joy for me.
Nice. Carol.
My binge watching would be on OWN network. It's called Queen Sugar. And I'm way too embarrassed to tell you the current book that I'm reading. I love romance novels, but I have to say that in the morning, similar to Almi, the U version, there are like these short devotionals that really ground me in the morning. They're really great. And the joy of serving in the superintendency, it goes back to, I just have like this quest for social justice and the opportunity to use like my role as a mechanism to try to get to that utopia of like living in a socially just country. So that would be the joy for me.
That's great. That's fabulous. Well, Deb Kerr, Almi, Abeyta, and Kelley, I want to thank you for being on this episode of our AASA and PDK 2020 Decennial Survey podcast series. I really appreciate the insight you've given into leadership as a woman and superintendency in general, and just kind of helping people understand what it's all about. So I am Josh Starr. It's been a pleasure to be with you all for this last hour or so. Make sure you take a look at the Decennial Survey. Follow us online, follow me on Twitter, and I hope everybody has a great day. So thank you all for joining us.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the AASA PDK Decennial podcast series. If you would like to purchase a copy of the AASA Decennial Report, please access links.aasa.org/decennial for more information.